So joining us next, it is my pleasure to introduce our closing summit keynote, Beth Kanter. Beth Kanter is a nonprofit thought leader, virtual facilitator, and author of The Happy, Healthy Nonprofit. She will be talking with us today about how to build your personal resilience and calm in a world filled with challenges, which I'm sure many of us can resonate with today. Please help me in welcoming Beth Kanter.
Great. Thank you, Michael, for that great introduction. And I so wish I was there in person, but I did the next best thing. I found a Zoom background that would create a connection between where I am now in San Jose and Wyoming. So I want to describe myself. My pronouns are she, her, hers. I am a white, middle-aged woman with short brown hair, brown eyes, and I have red framed eyeglasses. I'm wearing a yellow blouse and a sweatshirt because I'm coming to you from my home office, although you can't see it because I have this beautiful background behind me. So I am really thrilled to be here, and I'm going to be presenting on a couple of topics related to work-life balance and workplace well-being for artists and arts leaders. So I'm going to be talking about, first, I'm just going to give you some quick overview about the mental health impact of the pandemic and how the pandemic has really amplified existing workplace stress that was there before the pandemic. It's just accelerated. I'm going to go through some tips for work-life balance that are geared for individuals because I know we have artists, and many times artists are working individually in their studios. And there are also things that employees of arts organizations can also do to do work-life balance. And then I'm going to talk a little bit about creating a culture of well-being. This is primarily for those of you who are leaders in organizations. We can take care of ourselves, but we do spend time at work and working, and so we have to create this sort of sense of well-being. And there'll be a live Q&A following, so I want to encourage you to ask all of your questions as I'm presenting, and then Michael's going to come back and we're going to have a great conversation and bring in your questions. I'm going to cover a lot here and refer to different handouts and research, and I've created a curated list of resources and handouts for you. It's on that URL right there, and my slides will be there, and I find it really helpful for continued learning. So my first point, I just want to say that it's okay not to be okay. And if you've had moments during the last 18, 19 months when you're not feeling okay, guess what? It's okay. It's all right to feel exhausted and overwhelmed. It's okay to put yourself on the top of your to-do list and to make time to rest and recharge. And that's so important. And just like Naomi Osaka and Simone Biles, those Olympic athletes, they helped normalize a conversation about mental health. So as leaders, arts leaders, it's time to focus on your own mental health. And if you're running an organization, and encouraging your employees also to focus on their mental health. And particularly for artists, because I think artists are creative, and having a sense of well-being, I think, fuels creativity. So, and the reason for that, if you look at the chart that's on your right, that comes from Kaiser Health Foundation. And the pandemic has shown us a 300% increase in the number of adults reporting stress-related conditions like depression and anxiety. So that little blue box, that was January 2019 before the pandemic at 11%. January 2021, 41%. So now is the time to focus on our mental health and to destigmatize that conversation, and to provide, for those of you in organizations, to provide those supportive services like EAPs. The mental health issues that we're experiencing present on the spectrum just like the COVID virus, and they go from mild to severe. And not everybody is feeling the impact in all the same ways. On the severe end of the spectrum, we have depression, anxiety, and burnout. But there's also something else, a little bit more mild, and it's been dubbed languishing by Adam Grant in a recent article he wrote for the New York Times. He's a professor of sociology at the University of Pennsylvania. And he defines languishing as feeling blah, lack of motivation. It's not burnout because you have energy to do the work. It isn't depression because don't feel hopeless. It's just somewhat joyless and a sense of stagnation and emptiness. It feels like you're muddling through your days, looking at your life through a foggy windshield. So there is this sort of range of things that we're feeling. I know I have been feeling a number of things at different points through the pandemic. When I talk to colleagues, when I go around talking about well-being in the workplace, I hear this from nonprofits, from artists and arts leaders, literally across the country. So you're not alone, and it's a range of impacts. So the pandemic really has increased organizational causes and cost of burnout. And this is more for those of you in organizations. The causes of workout were there before the pandemic in certain workplace cultures, but they've been amplified. And those causes are things like unmanageable workloads and unreasonable time pressures, having to do so much with so little and have to have it done by yesterday, this urgency, role clarity and autonomy, not being clear on who's supposed to implement what, and not having the autonomy to execute, lack of support and communication from managers or for nonprofits from their boards, and then unfair treatment at work. So these are some of the causes that lead to burnout, and they've all been amplified by the pandemic, but they come with a real cost. And the cost are based on the Gallup poll, which looks at workplace well-being. 63% of employees are more likely to take a sick day if they're burned out, and that adds up. That is a cost. They're 2.6 times more likely to be actively seeking a different job, and that has been amplified during the pandemic. We're hearing about the Great Resignation, people leaving their jobs, wanting more flexibility. And when people are burned out at work, they experience a 13% reduction in performance goals. So there are real costs to burnout that we want to avoid by encouraging our employees to practice work-life balance and to create this sort of culture of well-being. There's also something that I think is specific to the pandemic, and it's been called Reentry Anxiety. I know now as people are starting to go back to offices that are in hybrid models, half are virtual, half in the office. Some places, depending on your public health guidelines, you have to be masked. We've been living with the fear of contagion for the last year and a half. So that is still with us. And we may have also having all our communication and interaction being mediated through the screen. We may have lost some of our social skills and experienced some social awkwardness, or maybe we're going to experience a level of anxiety because now we have to actually commute back to the office. We don't commute down the hall anymore. We have to get dressed. We can't wear sweatpants anymore. And all of that is creating anxiety for employees as they come back to life, come back to life, come back to the office, come back to looking for a way that's new normal. So that's the Debbie Downer part of the presentation. And now I'm going to get to some solution space. And I'm going to start with some work-life balance tips. And there's a growing body of research that shows us that there are some science-based ways that we can recharge our batteries, that we can bring back that inspiration and that creativity and that joy, and have great emotional, mental, and physical fitness. And the word for that is called flourishing. So here are the tips. So the first thing is to spot the early warning signs of burnout. Burnout And this is the WHO, the World Health Organization's definition that you're seeing on the screen. And I'll read it. It's a state of emotional, mental, and physical exhaustion that occurs when we feel overwhelmed by too many demands, too few resources, and too little recovery time. And when I've read this definition, sometimes I hear from folks in nonprofits saying, that's what it's like working in my nonprofit. So, so a lot of us may be experiencing the symptoms of burnout, but we don't know but we don't realize it. And those symptoms fall into a couple of different categories. There are physical symptoms like aches and pains, insomnia. There are the inability to concentrate, and also we might be more irritable, have a shorter fuse. We might have more negative thinking, and all of those things impact our productivity. So it's really important to have some sort of assessment. And in my book, we had the nonprofit burnout assessment that educates people about those signs. And the thing about burnout is that it happens in stages. You start out passion driven, and then if you keep on working and you don't take a break, you don't recharge, you might start to feel passion waning, and you might feel just a little bit of a little irritability, a few aches and pains. You get up to if you don't take care of yourself or practice work-life balance, you get into that passion challenge. It gets harder to work. You may be feeling negative and less motivated. And then finally, if you don't take care of yourself, you get up to passion depleted. And that's where you've burned out, and you're not good to yourself. You're not good to your family. You're not good to your community or your organization or to making your art. And you don't want to get up to that red zone because it's harder to bounce back. So that's why we want to assess and understand those symptoms of burnout. Now, here's an easier way to do it. Know your personal chaos index. All right. And this comes from the addiction literature from a psychologist named Peter Carnes. And when we're addicted to something, we lose sight of everything, even personal cleanliness. And certain behaviors start to emerge, like forgetting or double booking yourself, making sloppy mistakes that you wouldn't normally use. So keep an eye out for what your PCI is. My PCI is dirty dishes in the sink. And sadly, those are my dishes. Every morning, as part of my morning routine, I like to make sure there's no dishes in the sink. It takes 5 minutes to wash them and put them in the dishwasher. But if I look around and I see dishes in the sink, it means that I've told myself that I'm too busy to do the dishes. And that means that, to me, that's an early warning sign. And I need to hit the pause button and stop and say, am I too busy? Am I overworking? Did I have too many meetings? I need to pause and recharge. So what's your personal chaos index? Share it in the chat if you'd like. Remember the basics, all right? This is the Health Triad. That's what I talk about in my book, the Health Triad. We have exercise, sleep, and nutrition. This is all the stuff you've heard before from your mother maybe, or from your doctor. And it's important to remember. I'm not going to go through all of these because a lot of us already know this information, but I am going to focus on sleep. Because sleep is so important because it bolsters our immune system, and also it improves our ability to concentrate and to bring our best selves to our artwork, to being creative, or whether it's to doing our work. And the National Sleep Foundation says we need between 6 and 8 hours a day. And we need to really prioritize that. And there's been a phenomenon that's happening during the pandemic. It's been called revenge bedtime procrastination. And that's because we're not taking that time for ourselves during the day. So we're staying up late to do the things we want to do, thus robbing ourselves of a good night's sleep. So have good sleep hygiene, have a calming bedtime routine. Don't be reading work emails or be on the screen before bed. And if you're having trouble with insomnia, and I had plague-induced insomnia at the beginning of the pandemic, and I had a hard time sleeping, I found the Sleep With Me podcast work like a charm. So get enough sleep and take care of the basics. Pro tip here, You don't necessarily have to go to the gym to get some exercise in. You can practice exercise snacking. And this is taking short amounts of exercise throughout the day. And it's a great way to take a break between meetings if you're doing a lot of Zoom calls. It has as much benefit as, taking a full class at the gym, a Zumba class or jogging. But exercise snacking, exercise in small bites throughout the day. Using rituals to create boundaries between work and home, especially at home, because you don't know, for those of you who are still working virtually, and even if you've gone back to the office, you may still be working remotely for some of the time. It's really hard to establish a boundary when you're working at home because your work and your life is there all the time. And the woman that is pictured on the left is Marie Kondo. Some of you may be familiar with her New York Times bestseller, The Lifetime Magic of Tidying Up, where you're supposed to actually let go of things, starting with physical things like going to your closet and like holding each piece of clothing. If it sparks joy, keep it. If it doesn't, let it go. So she has a recommendation for creating rituals that help you separate work from life. And she does something, she brings a tuning fork, she lights candles and does a couple of deep breath meditations. I'm not suggesting that you do that ritual. I mean, it's a nice ritual, but pick something that you can do that helps you signal that it's your work day. What I do is I have a morning routine before I even get to work. All right. I have my cup of coffee. I'm a coffee person, not a tea person. And I enjoy even if it's just 15 minutes, my cup of coffee. During the pandemic, I got a fair trade coffee subscription, and a bag of coffee arrives once a month from some wonderful place in the world. I have I ground the beans, and I have a great coffee machine, and I make myself some wonderful coffee, and I sit with my coffee and I either read, I journal. I don't feel guilty because I'm not working. I'm preparing for the day. I'm feeding myself first. So create a morning routine where you have that sense and time to yourself for reflection and calm before starting the work. Incorporating quiet minutes throughout your day. A lot of us, especially in offices, are getting messages. We're going from meeting to meeting, and we're dipping into our email, and that's not giving our nervous systems a break. And if we do manage to do some micro few minutes of quiet throughout the day, maybe turn your phone on airplane mode. This has enormous benefits. It replenishes your nervous system. It gives you more energy. It helps you concentrate. It facilitates clear thinking and creativity, and it quiets some of those negative thoughts. So quiet is golden, and it has a lot of restorative qualities. Another thing that we might want to consider is to embrace single tasking. We've gotten really good at multitasking, right? And especially during virtual meetings, because we have for those of you in organizations, back to back meetings without a break, and the work has piling up and the email messages. So we're listening to a meeting. Maybe some of you are multitasking right now, answering emails while listening to this presentation. That's not good for our brains. And also we're creating something called time confetti, which is shredding our time into such small pieces that we're not really able to do anything meaningful. And the problem is we don't want to normalize continuous partial attention. We want to embrace this idea around focusing on a single task or a single project without a lot of interruptions. And when I train myself from constant multitasking to be able to focus, I had an incredible sense of well-being. I hope that you take a moment to think about how you can single task more. Zoom fatigue, reduce Zoom stress and fatigue. Again, even as we're going back into offices, we still will probably be relying on video conferencing. And Stanford University researchers have found that staring at the screen at these faces is doing something called nonverbal overload. Because we're not used to seeing strangers this close up, and it's eliciting something called the fight or flight response, and what that does, it increases our heart rates, it's pumping stress hormones into our body, and that's not good to do. And while having a group norm around turning cameras off is great, for yourself, if you're an individual, there are some things you can do, and those are turning your self view off in Zoom. And you can do that by going up to the dots in the upper right-hand corner of your video. And then you're not staring at yourself, because that creates stress, especially also go back to occasionally having audio calls, right? Or an old-fashioned conference call with just audio. Take a break, because processing the screen and talking is an additional cognitive load, which leads to that to that sense of exhaustion. One thing that I also do when I'm on Zoom meetings is I make that box with all the faces, I make it really small, and I try to keep it in my peripheral vision. And that also relieves some of the stress. Tip 6, manage your energy in addition to your time. We've been told time management, so we can do more, get more done in a shorter amount of time. But we only have energy to do so much. And our bodies, in fact, work in something called ultradian rhythms, which are cycles of 90 minutes of peak concentration. And then we need to replenish that by taking a break. And I know it sounds counterintuitive. Sometimes when we are so engaged in something, we don't want to take a break because we feel we'll lose it. But what we're doing is exhausting our energy and our concentration. So the breaks give us life. And if you're in the office and you are, or at your desk at home, and you're using your computer keyboard as a lunch tray, don't do that. Go out and take a walk, take a break, and you'll have a much more high energy afternoon. Pro tip is to take joyful breaks. I'm in San Jose, I'm in an urban area. And what I did, and we have hummingbirds all year round. So I put hummingbird feeders on every window in my house, so I can take a 5-minute joyful break by watching them. And they're the most amazing creatures. They're elegant, they fly. There's really incredible interactions between hummingbirds. And I get renewed in just a few minutes by just simply looking out my window and watching them visit the feeder. I'm in California, I'm near the coast. I'm only 20 minutes away. And there are days or weeks when I've had a lot of work going on, all right? And then I decide that I need to stop on this day, not feel guilty, knock off a few hours early, and just go and drive to the coast. And in fact, I've convinced my husband to do it too. And there's some days when we're overwhelmed, we just drive to the coast. And I guess this goes without saying that being in Wyoming with the beautiful mountains that you have and the beautiful nature, it's just probably outside your doorstep for many of you. Take advantage of that, because nature renews us. Plan your vacation, okay? Research shows that if we take a vacation, we will be more productive. We will have more work-life balance, and we will be healthier. But plan it in advance. 6 months in advance, 90 days in advance. Put a stake in your calendar so no one can take it away. And when you do take your vacation, go offline, all right? A vacation is not, answering staff emails from the middle of the woods if you can get a signal, or reading your work email. That is not a vacation. And I'm recovering at this. You'll see that picture that's on the right. That was my first off-the-grid vacation. I went kayaking in Monterey Bay, because I used to work during vacations. That's not healthy. So, and the reason I used to do that was because I was so afraid that my email would get so built up and under control that I would lose something. But I found out that that wasn't true, because I scheduled an extra day of my vacation where I was actually back in the office, but I didn't take my out of office message away. And I just went through and cleaned out my inbox, and I was back in a couple of hours. And the other thing that I also did was I enlisted my family, my kids, to be my accountability buddies. And I said that if you find me on my phone doing my work email, I'll take you out for ice cream or give you $10. And so they were very vigilant, and they helped keep me on track. So make sure that you plan your vacation in advance. And then when you do take your vacation, you are not plugged into the office through email and actually working. And the final pro tip around individual tips is to really write a whole self-care plan. And I do have a template that is in the materials that you can use. And it's a great thing to do once a year. If you're working in for an organization, it's a great thing to share with your staff and formalize it, because if you're more intentional about it, both individually or organizationally, it's likely to get done. So I'm just going to take a brief pause, and I want you to maybe just to reflect for a moment, to think about some of the things I just mentioned in terms of work-life balance for individuals. Think about if you have questions. We'll get to those in the live Q&A. And I'm going to then transition into talking about how you bring this into the workplace. After I just take a sip of water, which is another part of the basics, staying hydrated. In fact, there's a great game that you can play on Zoom. You do it kind of as a game. If anybody takes a sip of water, everybody else has to take a sip of water. And then you're getting your water. Water brings life, and you're hydrated. Okay, so I just talked about what you can do as an individual. I'm now going to widen the lens and talk about a culture of well-being in the workplace, and then we'll go into live Q&A. So the first thing, activating a culture of well-being, we are talking about culture change, and culture it has those components that you see on the left of your screen: purpose, values, behaviors, recognition, group rituals that you do, and cues. And when there's sort of a misalignment between values and behaviors, that's what causes a lot of stress. Changing culture can be difficult and slow, but I want you to think about it, not to reframe it in your mind as not as something difficult, not as something that's going to be uncomfortable. It may be a little, but it's really an opportunity to be creative and to create something new and to create something better. When we talk about a culture of well-being, we talk about the 5 F words, and these are all F words you can say, and these are all characteristics of a culture of well-being: function, friendship, feelings, forward, and fulfillment. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to explain each of these themes and give you some examples of how it plays out in the workplace. So functioning, I think the first thing we really need to do is to reduce and rethink meetings. Okay, so in the middle, does your calendar look like that? Mine used to, and going from back to back to back to back to back to back meetings, even when they were in person, was stressful. But now that if we're doing it through Zoom or a combination of screen and in-person meetings, that is elevating our stress levels. So we need to normalizing scheduling short breaks in between meetings, maybe having a 50-minute meeting instead of a 60-minute meeting. So there is that 10-minute transition time between meetings to sort of bring down the stress level. We also need to be thinking about being more fluid in the way that we work, and that's mastering kind of synchronous and asynchronous agendas. Now, synchronous is being in real time. That's what we are now, or what your staff meeting might be like. Every Monday at 10 o'clock we meet. Asynchronous is more flexible. It gives people the chance to do the work on their own time. So one way is to think about what in our meetings needs to be discussed in real time, and what are some things that we're doing on our meeting now that people can do or give feedback on asynchronously on their own time. So usually I'm seeing a lot of nonprofits switch to getting feedback on proposals or reports, and then coming to a meeting that's shorter, and then just using that for decision-making and discussion. Also, making time where people get the work done. And if you have a calendar that looks like this one in the middle, it's like, when do you get the work done? Well, what happens is that people start doing it on the weekends and after hours or before work, and that leads to overwork. So you want to build into your organization, deep times when people can do deep and focused work. I love this model. It comes from a software company. It's called Get S Stuff Done day. And what they do is they plot out a day of the month, a half day actually, and it's a large organization. So people work with their managers. They figure out what are the deep things that we need to work on that require more than just time confetti. And they block out that time. There's no meetings, no interruptions, and people get their work done. And this has lots of benefits because it helps people get ahead of the curve. It helps them be productive and do better quality work, which leads to better outcomes. Celebrations is part of friendship, which is the second F word. Now, people don't have to be best friends at work, but they do need to get along and have a sense of connection, which is so important. What you're seeing there during the pandemic, this comes from a nonprofit in Florida. They brought a llama from the local zoo onto the Zoom call to wish their executive director happy birthday. They sent a cake to her house during the meeting. It was a big surprise, and everybody wore birthday hats or had a birthday Zoom background. So celebrations, what can you celebrate together? And be careful that you aren't celebrating things like overworking or somebody staying at the office till 11 o'clock at night. We want to make sure that we're celebrating and recognizing healthy, balanced behaviors. Making connections is also important, especially in organizations where you have different departments. You want people to be able to know who else is in the organization. One organization that I work with in London, they are a high-techy kind of organization, and they use Slack a lot. And they use this app on Slack called the Donut Bot. And what the Donut Bot does is it randomly matches two people across the organization to go out and have coffee. And they did this during the pandemic. They had virtual coffee, and they also kicked in a couple of Starbucks gift cards to encourage people, to get good coffee. So friendship, and the way to do that is through celebrations and making connections. Feelings. People need to feel appreciated, respected. They need to feel psychological safety, that they can be themselves, that they can participate. And this can happen with shout outs. And it really doesn't matter how you do the shout out. It can happen, using Slack. It can happen in person at the meeting. But you need to design ways to acknowledge and appreciate people that matches your organizational culture. Dr. Gary Chapman has written a couple of books. The most recent is The Languages of Appreciation in the Workplace. And what he says in his research is that people like to be appreciated in different ways. Here, one size does not fit all. And the different ways include words of affirmation like "good job," acts of kindness, taking someone out to lunch or a coffee break, or sending some food to their house, like we did during the pandemic. Actual gifts or objects, T-shirts, water bottles, or quality time, one-to-one time. So it's good to get an understanding from your staff, like how people want to be recognized and appreciated. And you want to make sure that you're not leaving anyone else out. Everyone deserves appreciation. And when you're doing something where everyone is going to be recognized, make sure that everybody does get recognized, because it can backfire. The fourth F is forward, and this is about improving personal and professional growth. And one of the ways to do this is to take classes, providing professional development for staff. What was so great during the pandemic, a lot of the course providers were offering their classes for free. And I was really lucky. I got to take Lori Stantos's class at Yale on happiness in the workplace for free. And that was on Coursera. And you can be really creative about this. But this is a chance for developing skills or personal growth. And that's forward. And finally, the last F is fulfillment. And this is making a connection to the mission. Why are we doing this work? constantly, that's where we can feel like a sense of burnout or isolation, when we're not connected to the mission of whatever that art is. And here you see the Cara Collective, and they're an organization in Chicago that does workplace development. And what they had before the pandemic was a drumming circle where they would invite people who had been through their program to tell their stories, and they invite everyone on staff to listen. So we give them a sense of joy to hear the accomplishments of what their program is doing for this community. And it doesn't just have to be external clients that or people that you're serving. It can also be the staff telling stories about why they're doing the work they're doing. Storytelling affects the brain in a very positive way. It makes us feel accomplished. It makes us feel great. So some sort of internal storytelling that connects everybody back to the mission. So, so just before we open it up now for Q&A, I just want to mention that we don't just sort of snap our fingers and say, we're going to have a culture of well-being. It does take an approach and a process, and it's really important to get feedback from people. And what I've included in the materials is a process called the 5 Fs, and it's essentially a brainstorm with your staff, and then kind of figuring out what kind of small step you want to take related to one of the 5 Fs, and then you start practicing it intentionally until it becomes part of your culture. So that'll be up on the handouts that are on the resource sheets. So as we transition into the live Q&A, I just want you to think about, like, what's one thing, for those of you that are in an organization, which one thing that your organization or team can take action on in terms of creating a culture of well-being. Just maybe think about that for a moment. And I just want to remind you that that is where you can find all the resources, that URL at the bottom, including the slide deck. And that's where you can find me. You can always find me at bethkanter.org and a copy of the book. And I'm going to stop sharing and we'll kind of slide into the Q&A with Michael.
Beth, thank you so much for your very thoughtful comments about how we can approach taking care of ourselves and taking care of those we work with, you know, with what has been a really complicated year, right? And in many ways continues for many people. So we'd love to open it up for any questions or comments that folks have at this time. Please feel free to, you can drop questions in the chat box. You can use the under reactions. There's a place to raise your hand if you have some questions, or just feel comfortable to unmute yourself and hop on as well. So do we have any questions to start us off today? I guess one question I was thinking about, Beth, while you were talking, you know, you had a couple great, you know, very personal things that you did to kind of set yourself in a structure to keep working during complicated times. I was wondering if you could kind of list the one main thing that you felt like you did to help with your self-resilience over the time of the pandemic.
That's a great question, Michael. I continue to do something that was very transformative in my life 7 or 8 years ago, before I even wrote the book, when I was experiencing my own burnout, and that was walking or strolling. I like to call it strolling. I had been through a period where I was overworking, and I was also in a period where I was also caretaking for one of my parents who was very ill. And I'm also a mother and a wife. And so it was I didn't have any time for myself, and that led to a pretty bad burnout mixed up with some grief. And then when I went in to see my doctor, I got all those tests that, you know, you're supposed to get done, and my cholesterol was sky high. And my doctor said to me, you know, before we start with all the drugs and stuff, let's see if you can't do a little better with, you know, what you're eating and get a little exercise. And I kind of tried not to roll my eyes. And she said, well, let's just go out and start walking 20 minutes a day. And so I thought, well, I could do that. And at the same time, I bought a Fitbit, which measures your steps. And I started walking. I did 1,000 steps the first day. And then I kept on increasing it until I got up to 10,000 steps a day. And I do 15,000 steps a day. I went back and I got my test. My cholesterol came down into the normal range. I was lucky. And I felt better. My mood changed. So the initial shock of the pandemic, I wasn't walking and I started to feel it. And so walking helped me. Just even walking around my neighborhood, we got a pandemic puppy, elder dog from a rescue, walking the dog. So I found that for me, physical activity really helped.
Great, thank you, Beth. Lindsay tossed a great comment in the session in the chat box. She says for her off time, she likes watching foreign films with subtitles so that it forces her to be reading while she's paying attention, so she can't get distracted. I think that's great, Lindsay. That's wonderful. Yeah. Beth, I was wondering if you could talk a bit about, I know you do a ton of work with arts and cultural organizations across the country, and you're very tied into the National Assembly of State Arts Agencies and working with other state arts agencies across the country. And I'm wondering if there are a couple, key pieces that kind of stick out to you for arts organizations in relation to burnout of staff, or burnout of even board members or advocates that are taking part in helping support the arts and culture sector. Is there some that really kind of stick out to you from your work in this sector?
Yeah, I mean, so in my book, there are cartoons. I worked with a cartoonist named to kind of capture in a funny way, like the essence of, the idea. So one of my favorite cartoons, and it was inspired by a story I heard from somebody who worked for a long time in an arts agency, who remain nameless, but in advocacy, I believe. So if you can imagine a cartoon, and in the image, there is a man, the patient, who is there. He's laying on a gurney. Obviously, he's sick, probably, and he has the sensors in him. It looks like they're monitoring his heart. Maybe he had a heart attack. The nurses and the doctor's listening to his chest, and they're all huddled around him and kind of trying to hear what he's saying. And he's saying, grant proposal due Thursday, must get out. and so, or whatever it is. So a lot of, the sort of idea that, and I've seen it a lot with arts advocates and artists, because we're so passionate, that we put our work before our physical and mental health. And that we feel that if we're not doing that, that we're goofing off, and that we're not, that we feel guilty. And I really think that we have to change that mindset. And that we need to think about that taking a break, replenishing our energy, feeding ourselves is not selfish. It's actually very generous and generative. And it's allowing us to continue this really important work. Tactically, I'll give another thing too. I think in the arts, we are incredibly lucky, because I have also seen there's been a lot of virtual team building exercises, and I actually brought one in to my one team I'm working with, and we're working in philanthropy, and none of them have an arts background, and they were all sent a canvas and some acrylic paints, and we got on Zoom and we painted together. And at first they just thought it was weird. And then they realized wow, this is such a relief. This is just so amazing. But we as artists and arts organizations, we know how to do that stuff. Let's do it for ourselves.
Beth, I think that's a great point. We the Wyoming Arts Council ourselves did a paint party ourselves, where we sent canvases to everyone and did that ourselves. So I think that's a great point. It looks like Rachel Clifton, our assistant director, may have a question for us.
Yeah. Hi, Beth. How are you?
Good. How are you?
Good, thanks. Yeah, I was going to say the same thing, Mike. We did that, and it was a blast to see everyone's painting at the end too, and everyone's different work styles, I think, really came out. So I would definitely encourage the virtual paint party. But my question, in talking about creating a culture of care in the workplace, I think it's some of these tangibles are like, okay, yes, I can implement that for myself. But if you're trying to actually kind of shift the culture of an organization and kind of bring other people on board to start doing some of these things too, how do you recommend we start initiating these conversations, whether it's with colleagues or staff members or our board members, and say, we really want to start taking better care of ourselves and be a little more mindful in the workplace? How do you start that process on an organizational level?